Let's turn back now to some domestic news. In our top story, we were covering that Toronto has issued an ultimatum to the federal government. The city is planning a big 10.5% property tax increase, the biggest one in 2 decades, actually, but threatening that it could be even more, 16.5%, if the feds don't pony up $250 million for refugee housing. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland's office sent CTV a statement today that says, in part, in response, we have contributed more to the City of Toronto than any federal government in Canadian history, and we welcome the province of Ontario similarly stepping up its support. What will the Mayor of Toronto get for this big ultimatum? Let's bring in the front bench to talk about that. Elliott Hughes is a political commentator and senior associate with Sumas Strategies. He's a former senior advisor to Liberal finance and defense ministers as well. Former Alberta MLA and cabinet minister, Gary Marr is here. He's the president and CEO of the Canada West Foundation. Anne McGrath is national director of the NDP, and Sabrina Nanji is the founder of Queen's Park Observer, where she is a journalist. Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday.
Hello.
Good to see some big news south of the border, but some significant news here north of the border, I should say, as well. What are how smart do you think, or maybe not, and Olivia Chow's strategy is here? Basically, pinning the blame on the feds if your taxes go up more.
Well, first I got to say, I mean, it is about time that I was going to say Alberta. It's about time that Toronto had a champion that was unequivocally on the side of the city. The city, municipalities in Canada take on a lot of the burden of most of the services that people receive, but they have very little capacity to actually raise revenues. So the federal government and the provincial government have a responsibility to the City of Toronto, which I might add is larger than some provinces. So it is a very significant economic driver. The population is very large. It's very diverse. And there are a lot of needs there, and so I think that she's right to actually demand that the federal government and that the provincial government pony up and support the City of Toronto. And I think that it is actually going to be a winning strategy for her. Certainly, she's doing quite well already in terms of people's opinions of her mayoralty.
A year ago, Sabrina, if we had been sitting here and we would think that a Mayor, Olivia Chow, would be getting along better with a Premier Doug Ford than a Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, we might have been surprised by that. But in fact, right now, that seems to be the case.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Olivia Chow clearly is playing hardball with the feds here. She did have a lot of leverage with the province and, has been friendly with Doug Ford. They've managed to work out a deal. She has gotten a significant win for the city by being able to upload, 2 major highways, re-upload, I should say, back to the province, which is going to unlock billions of dollars in the coming years. But the city is still staring down, a nearly $1.8 billion budget hole this year. And I think one thing that is very smart for Olivia Chow here is that she has called this potential additional 6% hike in the property taxes, the federal impacts levy, essentially telling Trudeau, like, she's launched a game of chicken here. She's telling Trudeau, this is going to be pinned on you in Toronto, which is one of the few liberal bastions and strongholds for the feds, which are tanking in the polls right now. So I think politically, this is a huge risk for her. She is enjoying a honeymoon phase, so the timing probably works. And now the ball is in the federal government's court.
Sabrina brings up a good point, Gary. I mean, on the one hand, to be fair to the federal government, their transfers to the City of Toronto have increased so much over the last 8 years. Like in 2015, you're looking at $200 million. This coming year, you're looking at over $2 billion. At the same time, the political context that Sabrina offers is also significant, right? Toronto is a bastion of support right now for the federal Liberals. My guess is after today, they're getting a lot of calls in the PMO and the finance minister's office from MPs.
I think that's probably true, that there is that going to be that kind of pressure that that Mayor Chow has created. But I point out, I'm here in the city of Vancouver today. Property taxes are going up here about 7.5%, in Calgary 7.8%, Edmonton 6.6%. So there are responsibilities that have fallen upon municipalities to pick up. It'll be very interesting to me to see if it's not just MPs from the Toronto area calling on the Prime Minister's office to look into this, but that there might be other mayors of big cities across Canada that are looking at what Mayor Chow does and seeing if there might be something in it for themselves. I think that it is a legitimate point to make that perhaps the issues of that are federal jurisdictions, the responsibility for those have fallen upon municipalities. That doesn't seem appropriate. Rather than transfer it directly to the City of Toronto, which they could, perhaps they should, look at taking on the responsibility themselves in terms of delivering services. Maybe they're not capable of doing that. And so if they're not, then doing it through municipal transfers might make sense, but it wouldn't be just the City of Toronto that would be looking for this.
How do you think this one plays out, Elliot?
Well, I mean, I think over the long term, I think they will come to an agreement at some point over some sum of money. I would imagine over the next 6 to 9 months. From what I understand, there's been very warm, good relations between Ms. Chow and Minister Freeland and the Finance Department. They've been talking about these issues for a long time. I suspect they'll continue to talk about them, and they'll come to a solution. I think a couple of good points have been raised so far. I think the one point that I find interesting is I think Ms. Chow's strategy to date has been good as mayor. She's been a successful mayor. I think Anne makes a very good point about her role, about how she's sort of an adult in the room, how she's been able to have a relationship now with Doug Ford. I think that role, though, of sort of continuing to come to the feds asking for money, you can only play that trick so many times. And I think at some point it starts to get a bit old. And I wonder if we're starting to near that point. The other thing I would say is if Toronto doesn't raise its property taxes, its funding becomes unsustainable over the long term. They're going to have to make that change. And so that change is probably inevitable. So we will see where this plays out. I mean, let's recall, the feds have been given a lot of money to Toronto, as you pointed out, Vashi. They've also been giving money for asylum seekers to other cities across Canada, which directly helps Toronto so that folks don't sort of go to where Toronto is and the jobs and the opportunities are and stay in Calgary and Vancouver and Montreal or whatever the case might be. I suspect we will see a deal between the two levels of government over the next couple of months, but we must also remember that cities are the creatures of the provinces. And Ontario has made clear that they want to keep that control over Toronto. And so perhaps they also should be stepping up a little bit more here too.
I understand the genesis of that point, and I just feel like given what Sabrina outlined about the deal that Doug Ford was able to strike with Olivia Chow, it's a big chunk of change. It's a big change in responsibilities of overseeing things. In this particular instance, I feel like I would have a hard time thinking that the province is going to contribute more, especially when they can make the argument that the control over who is able to cross the border is in federal jurisdiction.
Well, it's clear that the feds are where she's got her sights trained right now. I don't think that that's going to let the province off the hook for longer term. I think that she's very cognizant of the immense needs in Toronto. A lot has been allowed to slip over the last however many years, and there are a lot of needs there. And she's been super clear on the need for funding for the refugees who are sleeping on the street in Toronto. It is a crisis, and there needs to be, and it is not something that the City of Toronto should be coming up with. So I actually think this is such a smart move, especially designating an increase an increase above and beyond the 10.5% to the feds in terms of what it's called.
My only question is, I've just got 30 seconds left in this segment, Sabrina, but I know she's going to call it the federal levy, but do you think, is your sense that Torontonians will separate the onus, the burden of who they are mad at, or they're just going to say, hey, Olivia Chow put a 16.5% tax increase on me this year?
Yeah, I think that's the big question mark here. It's a huge risk for Olivia Chow. I think she's going to wear some of this, no doubt, but I think she is trying to pin this on the feds in an area that's critical for them, especially now. And so she's really playing hardball here, and I think it might work.